My partner and I got dispatched for a 57-year-old male that couldn't move his legs and was located on the second floor of his house. We get to where the address should be, but it's just an empty lot. The address we were going to was 2810, and on the left of the lot was 2812, and to the right of the lot was 2808. I asked our dispatcher to try and call the man back, and the dispatcher said the number the man called from had been disconnected. As we were standing there trying to figure out what was going on, a neighbor comes out and asks us what we're doing. I asked her if she knew anything about the address, and she said there had been a house with that address on this empty lot that had burned down 4 years ago. The owner of the house was a 57-year-old male who died in his wheelchair on the second floor of the house. On Halloween night a few years back, we were called to a costume party being held on an upper floor of an apartment complex. Noise complaint or something. We got to the apartment building close to midnight, and right as we arrived, I saw a blur of motion and heard a loud wet smack. I located the point where the blurry figure landed. Laying on the ground a few feet from the door was a corpse that had fallen some 9 stories from the party. He had hit the ground pretty fast, head first, so the top of his head had exploded, scattered throughout the front lawn. What's even worse was the lower half of his head was still intact, but had lodged itself in the man's chest cavity, and his neck was broken in several places. He was dressed as Batman. Not a cop, but a security guard. I worked at a trucking facility. I get a call from the spotter/yard driver telling me to call an ambulance and to get back there as soon as possible. I turn the camera over, and I can't find anything other than some woman going nuts next to her trailer. I drive back there and find her screaming her head off, something about being sorry. Then I saw her husband had been adjusting the tandems on the trailer. This requires you to move a lever under it and move the trailer once it's in place. So he told his wife to move the trailer while he held the lever up. The lever stuck. He slipped, and his wife ran him over with a fully loaded trailer. He was still alive when I got there. He didn't make it though. We got the spotter to move the trailer so they could get the body out. Called to the scene of a death on a highway. I get there. It's a small sedan, and the young guy that's in the vehicle is bent over, head pretty smashed in, and 2 hockey stick handles through his seat and then through his chest. Cell phone in hand, middle of texting, saying something along the lines of, "Heading to game now, prepare to lose," except there was no E. He was unable to text the last E to finish the word lose. He had been looking at his phone, rear-ended the car in front of him, and then the car behind him hit his trunk, pushing the hockey sticks he had through the fold-down seat and through him. Okay, so suicide calls always creep me out. Walking into the house, knowing you're going to find a body hanging somewhere is awful. I showed up and I was the first responder there. I went in and I found the body. He was hanging in a kind of stairwell. He was a youngish woman, and the worst part was, her young daughter was in the house. When I got there, I found the young daughter playing by her mother's feet, which were dangling a couple of feet from the ground. I walked in and kind of froze in shock. She didn't protest and happily came with me. By this time, another officer and a paramedic car had showed up. I left the girl with the other officer, who was a woman with kids of her own, so I assumed she would be better at talking to the girl than me. I went back inside with the paramedics, who quickly decided that this woman was definitely dead, and they couldn't do anything. Still makes me shiver to this day. I don't know how long exactly the woman was hanging there, but it was probably about a day. The fact that her daughter was there, playing right next to her mother, not a care in the world. She had no idea what was going on. My dad's a police officer, and about 15 years ago, he was called to a man's house where the neighbors had reported him for strange activity or something. When he got there, it was about 8 a.m. on a weekday morning. When he was getting out of his cruiser to go to the man's door, he noticed a school bus coming to stop outside of a student's house. The school bus put the big stop sign out and opened the door to let the student cross. The girl who was crossing looked to be about 12 years old. She had to walk across the road to get to the bus. As she was walking across the road, my dad approached the man's door. He heard an engine rev, turned to see a sports car blow through the bus's stop sign and hit the little girl, sending her body flying through the air. My dad leapt over and applied CPR on her for half an hour. There was no success. She had died on impact, and my dad had to arrest the guy who hit her. My husband is in Air Force Security Forces. He got a call to respond to a 911 hang-up at some location he'd never heard of. He and the other person on patrol went out to the location, and it was about a 40-minute drive into the middle of nowhere. They get to the building, and it is completely abandoned. It's also a huge building, like a warehouse or something. Everything is completely dark, and they check every room, and they even found the working phone. I guess if the phone worked, it hadn't been abandoned for too long. But they said they never heard noises and still couldn't find anything. They passed absolutely no cars on their way out as well. No houses, no sign of any other people. It was a creepy experience. I was approaching a car in a drainage ditch, windows cracked. You can already smell the booze. A young woman in the driver's seat, thin little thing, reeks of Jack, bloodied face from the airbag, and she's muttering something over and over. "Ma'am, I'm here to help." She continues looking forward and muttering. "Ma'am, I'm here to help. Are you okay?" I touch her lightly on the shoulder. She stops muttering. She turns to me and says the worst thing I've ever heard. "Where's my baby?" It's at this point that I noticed the child's seat in the passenger seat for the first time. I now noticed why the window was broken in that area. The baby, who evidently flew out the window, apparently had every bone in her body crushed. Well, at least, that's what I was told by the paramedics that actually found the baby when they arrived. The girl was arrested. Some teenagers with Mustangs decided to race each other down the highway at 1 a.m., end up losing control at insane speeds and initially bumping each other, sending the car in the front lane off into the trees. Driver somehow survived and was medevaced out in critical condition. Car in the left lane went over the guardrail median and headfirst into a Jeep, and then caught on fire. We got on the scene and found the now extinguished, burnt mess of the wreck. Passengers of the Mustang were just carbon stacks. No bodily or facial recognition whatsoever, just charred masses of what used to be people. The driver of the Jeep was severed in half, torso hanging out of the driver's side window, legs still by the pedals, and organs everywhere in the seat. The worst part was the driver of the Jeep was just minding his own business, driving along wherever he was going, all because some kids decided to be idiots. Life was over in a split second. Former EMT here. Less than 1 year ago, I was on a call. This is the call that made me quit. My unit gets called to a multi-car collision on the interstate. We arrive to a sedan on its side in the right lane and an SUV in the median, over top of the cable stop. 2 men and a female. All adults are walking around with minor scrapes. A woman is hysterical though. Fire rescue was working on the SUV. When it rolled, it had landed on the post, perfectly squishing the child in the center car of the seat. The 5-year-old sister was pinned by the neck and waist to the seat, and the 7-year-old brother was decapitated with his head sitting on the roof, basically looking at his younger sister. I removed the head and talked to the little girl, who was the age of my daughter at the time, telling her she would be okay. Fire rescue cut the cables to release her from the seat, and because there was tension on the cables, they moved and basically sliced her in half. She didn't make it 20 feet to the ambulance, literally died in my arms. My best friend is a paramedic. She took a call for a child who had fallen into a pool. There were actually 2 kids who had wandered out of their home, and they found the little girl floating in the shallow end of the neighbor's pool. No sight of the little boy. The dad had gotten the little girl out of the pool and was desperately trying CPR when the paramedics arrived. Still hadn't found the little boy. The paramedics took over CPR, and not too long after, they found the little boy in the deep end of the pool. My friend said that dad was wailing and horrified that his little boy had been there the whole time, and he hadn't helped him or even thought to look in the deep end. Both of the kids died. I went on a police ride-along once, and we responded to a collision on the highway at about 2 a.m. For the previous 2 hours, I had stayed either inside or just near the car for serious calls. This time, I recognized my friend's boyfriend, who was a paramedic already on the scene, so I approached. I didn't want to distract him or anyone else who was working, so I just stood there and watched him work on one of the victims. I don't know whether the man was the driver, passenger, or passerby, but his eyes were wide open and darting around, and he was red with blood from neck to knees. My friend's boyfriend calmly picked up what looked like a pile of wet laundry. It turned out it was the man's intestines, and softly said to him, "You're not going to live." All the breath left my body when I heard him say that. Somehow, it was clear that he meant it as something tender and human to human in the last moment of this man's life, but it gave me chills, and that's all I can think about when we're talking.